Hello and welcome to this Leeds Met tutorial on skeleton rigging. So what you can see here is I've got this skeleton model that I've brought in from TurboSquid, and I've got a biped laid out ready for rigging. Okay, so let's have a look at what we're going to do. First off, I'm just going to hide the bone objects, that includes the biped, and take a look at what I've got. I've got a skeleton that's separated into multiple parts, individual ribs, and arm bones. I've also got a full leg, so that needs separating out into separate parts, and separate teeth that want grouping together. So that's what I'm going to do to start with. I'm going to start grouping these teeth together. So just control clicking through, I'm going to be selecting these teeth and then grouping them together. Now this tutorial, there's probably going to be quite a bit going on. And I've not got, I can't unfortunately go through it all beforehand and make sure it works. So it might be that things are going wrong and I've got to figure things out as I go. But that's the nature of rigging. This is a complex subject, so you've got to try things out. You're going to get things wrong. You're going to try something else. The more you work with a piece of software, the more you'll get to expect its little quirks and kinks that you can predict and then circumvent with ease. There we go. So what I've done now is I've created these two groups for teeth upper and teeth lower. Hopefully I've not called them both teeth upper. No, I've not. And now what I'm going to do, because I want them to move with the objects I've created, so they're now working together, they're grouped together. I'm going to take that and just make sure that that's grouped together. Yep, so the jaw is moving. So this is some preparation work I did before, they're all parented together. Next thing I want to do is I want to take these ribs and I'm going to group them into a single object. The reason for that is in a human, the rib cage is a fixed volume, it cannot be bent or flexed. I mean, if you take a look at it, it's a big old structure and lots of bones. There's no real flexion points within there, so you can't bend it, basically. These ribs are not going to get close together. There is a bit of expansion if you breathe in, but it's nothing to do with the flexion of the spine. So this whole section does not bend. Because of that, I can group those together in a single object. So group, call that ribs. Okay, and just to make sure, I'm just going to hide that selection. Now, if you followed through a tutorial before, you'll have noticed that my menu doesn't necessarily work with the camera software running. What I noticed there was I'd missed a rib out from that grouping, so I'm going to undo it and try and get in here and add it onto my selection. There we go. Right click, group, call it ribs. Hopefully now when I hide selection, yes, I got them all that time. Okay, now the spine is another issue that we've got to deal with, because the spine it's got a lot of bones in it. In order to rig that, you're not going to be able to create all those individual joints in biped. It's going to be far too cumbersome to manage in terms of ease of animation and how you're going to deal with it at this point. So I'm going to take the entire spine and I'm going to group it together as an entire object. So when that object gets rigged, it's not going to be parented as my other joints are, it's going to be skinned. So it will flex, so the bones themselves will flex, but that's an easier solution than setting up all the individual parts that we're going to need. Okay, so going into perspective view, what we'll note is if I just unhide everything, when I've loaded this, I didn't initially notice it, but looking at it, the legs, if you look at them, that little bone there at the front, that's a patella, and your patella goes on the front of your knee. So these legs are in fact backwards. So I'm going to rotate these around and reposition them so that they're correct. So to start with, I'm going to just group these two legs together. Doesn't need a name because I'm going to be ungrouping them later. I'm going to press W, and it brings up the move button. And I'm going to move the pivot point of these legs, because I want them to be able to rotate around the top where the ball of the joint is. So that's about there. So when I click over to E, yep, that has worked. If it hasn't moved, sometimes it doesn't move for all the different attributes. If you just flick it on and off again, it will work. Okay, so now I want to rotate that around the Z-axis by 180 degrees, so I can just type that in. Okay, I want to move them into position. Let's just redo that. Okay, so if I go into a left view and press Z to zoom in. Okay, so you can see they've moved slightly out of their socket there, so just move them back in. I would say my pivot point's a little bit far back, so if I'm rotating around that point, it's going to breach out. So I'm going to move that pivot again. Click W and just move it forwards a bit and up a tiny bit. Okay, so now when I rotate, that leg's going to stay fixed in position. And then I just want to rotate it forward so the legs meet up with the feet again. There we go. Go back into perspective. And there, the legs are the right way around now, and they're correctly orientated within the sockets. So I can now go group, ungroup. Now another little bit of preparation work I've got to do. If you take a look at this object, this whole leg is a single unit. So I'm going to have to change that. So if I go to modifiers, conversion, turn to poly, that means I can then okay, so that's not worked. Let me just right click, scroll down, convert to editable poly. That's better. Okay, so I want to select an element. So that means I can now select an individual element within this object. An element is defined by a polygon unit that is not connected to another by any vertices. So I can select that and I can click detach. And I will call it. Doesn't really matter what I call it for now. I want to keep these two lower leg unit bones as one, but I do want to separate out that patella. Detach. Okay. So yeah, that'll do for now. Come out back into that and minimize my graphite tools. I'm not going to do the other leg because it's just repetition that you don't need to see. So I now have separate items for there. Let's have a look at how we're going to get these rigged. So what I'm going to do is in display, turn back on the ability to see bones. And I'm going to do some parenting. So you saw me do that up above on the teeth and on the jaw. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to parent some of these polygon bones to these joints of the leg. So I'm just going to collect this select and link button. Click on the item I want to be the child and drag to the item I want to be its parent. You'll see a quick highlight there and then it's done. Simple as that. I want to do the same with this lower leg unit. And the patella, I'll just drop it on here for the sake of ease. Okay, so that's that being done. Just go back into a selection mode, and now if I were to move this item, you'd see that those bones go with it. They don't bend, they don't flex, they move appropriately for a skeleton. So you can see that's a real quick way of dropping those bones on there. If I were to do the rib cage, I might say, let's have a look. What I might do is go into the structure of the of this object and say Spine lengths, I want fewer. I'll say 3. And just turn off that mode. So I'm going to parent my rib cage to that item there. So now if I were to select all the bones in the spine and to rotate that, you'd see that those ribs now stay nicely in place. Okay. Right. One more before I move on to another type of rigging. I'm going to rib the hips up to this hip locator, or bone even. And so now that when that moves, should see. Oh yes, you can't select that straight off, can you? Can I do it like that? Yes, I can. So that moves with it now, and as does that leg that I've already parented up. Okay. One more, just because it's interesting. I'm going to do this clavicle here. So the clavicle, I'm going to link to this shoulder bone. Wait, I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to parent that, because it seems that this clavicle is two separate, is one unit, so I'm going to do exactly the same again. And I'm going to find my convert menu, convert to editable poly, and detach that item there. So you'll find this happens as you're going through. You're going to find objects that aren't quite set up as you want. It's a very complex object here, but you can just quickly adapt. So now I can do that parenting that I wanted to do. Done. So if I select that bone there, I can now rotate, and that goes with it. If I want to get more, just a little bit more realistic, let's parent that humerus to the arm bone. Execute, change mode. When I now press E, so that whole system moves together. You can see the bone rotating with the IK there. Very, very nice. Now, we're going to take a look at this bone here now. This is the scapula. The scapula works in a different way to what you'd expect. It's fixed in place just above this humerus bone here, and it then kind of slides around in quite a peculiar way around the rib cage. So we're going to explore a few ways we're going to try and set that up. First things first though, it's both bones are as one unit, so I've just got to convert to editable poly, yep, and detach that out. Okay, I would advise sticking with a good naming convention, but for the purpose of this, like I say, I'm not going to worry too much. Now I'm going to move the pivot of this scapula, as you saw me do before, to just there. We'll have a go, just check it in the front view and check its height. Just underneath there. Okay, just check its rotations in the right place as well. It is. Right. Now this is where things get tricky, because what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be parenting the scapula to this shoulder bone. There we go. So, as this rotates, it comes right the way out there. So what we've got to do is we've got to make it so that that sort of points in and slides along the rib cage. So as it goes up, that's not a realistic thing for a scapula to do. So I'm going to try a technique called a look-at constraint. You may have seen this if you went through the Gatling gun tutorial, but we're going to give a go and see what happens here. So in create, I'm going to create a helper of a point. Doesn't matter really where you create it. T and W. And I'm going to position this along the rib cage. underneath the scapula. So let's take a look where it is at the moment. I want to move that in, and down, and in. Okay, so that's in place now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to parent that object to these ribs, but it's a little hard to see in there, so I'm going to show you another way of doing it. I'm going to go into Graph Editors, New Schematic View, and this lists all your items as if they were an object. So I've got my point there, and now I've got to locate my rib group. The easiest way to do that is if I select the ribs and press Z. Okay, so that rib group's there. My pointer is there. Okay, so you can see I've got this rib group and I've got this point that I've created. I'm going to right click. It's in here somewhere. There it is, connect. It brings up the connect tool. You can also get to there. I'm going to click and drag and drop it on there. Okay, so that is now a child of the ribs. So if the ribs move, that point will move with it. Okay, come out of that view now. Right, let's try and establish this connection. I'm going to say animation, constraints, look at constraint. Gone the wrong way now. Let's select the scapula first, animation, constraint, look at constraint, and select that. Now it's jumped off by a mile here, but don't worry, there's an easy solution to that. In the motion tab, scroll down and click, where is it? Keep initial offset. That restore it into its place. Let's see if this works. It might not have worked. If not, we're going to try a different solution, but let's just see what's happened. That's not quite working for me. It's just pivoting slightly oddly. Given that this is a bit too much motion, it might not be bad actually. Okay. I can live with the type of motion that's working here. It is staying seated correctly on that bone. It is moving around those ribs. What I think is going on is that the positioning of this point is just slightly off. So I'm going to just click on that. I'm just going to, in the motion tab, at the very top, I'm just going to delete that for now. I think that what's going on is that it's inside the ribs a bit too much, so I'm going to move it ever so slightly. Just get it outside. I might bring it up and there. Right, let's try it again, see what happens. Animation, constraints, look at constraint, and then select that point. Okay, again, don't worry. What we're going to do is scroll down, keep initial offset, restores its position, and let's have a look at how it's working now. Yeah, that's not bad. It's not great. You want to do a fair bit of tinkering with that, but it's not bad at all. There's a reasonable sort of connectivity there, so it's working well. It could be that that these arms are as far back as they're going to go, so you might want to constrain how far back they can go. But generally, it does look like that scapula is more or less sliding along those ribs. It does penetrate at place. What you might want to do is, say you did an animation where that happened, you can then take your point and start animating that outwards, so you can then key that so it's got the correct sort of slide for your object. Okay, so we're going to conclude that section of the tutorial. We've done some basic setups and had a look at a bit more of a complex setup here in the scapula. Similar techniques you might want to use in the forearm to get these two bones rotating correctly. However, you might not. It is It's up to you to sort of take these techniques I'm showing you and try and to research them to figure out how to get them work for the various elements of your project. So yeah, that's the basic start. You've seen how to parent things. What we're going to look at in the next tutorial is setting up a rig controller, and what that's going to control is how open and closed the jaw is. You can then use that to set up other things, such as how much flexion the fingers have, and so you can have sliders to control that. I'll see you in the next tutorial.